Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives. To open up the conference is Philippi. She'll be talking about new psychedelics, lifestyle, and healing stories. And to give you a bit of a bio, Philippi was a journalist for Conde, Nast, and Rolling Stone, lived in Los Angeles, and is now based in Berlin. She writes for Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, is a book author, and now the founder and CEO of the New Health Club, a lifestyle platform for the age of mental wellness and psychedelics, creating podcasts, a newsletter, and an upcoming show about modern healing stories. We're extremely excited to have you, Anne, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, can you hear me? I hope you can hear me right now. Can I get a sign if you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Marek. I'm very excited to be on this conference. And you introduced me already so nicely, so I'm gonna really just keep a short introduction about myself. You said I come from journalism. I worked for Conde Nast, for Rolling Stone, and also because of the media situation in the last couple of years, I decided to create a platform that is no longer related to the classic media world as we know it. And so then I got very much interested in psychedelics. And so I thought, well, this is the perfect place for me. I would like to engage in. So a little bit what we actually do. So we started, I think like 6-7 months ago with a regular podcast, like a weekly podcast with basically a lot of people who will be also take part in this conference. Very interesting, very relevant, very thriving people in the psychedelic world, like Christian Angermayer, I think he will be also on today, or Robin Card-Harris is coming on next week. Rosalind Watts, a very interesting scientist who was engaged related to the Imperial College in London. Michael Pollan we had last week. And what I really like about the last 6 months, I would say, is that we kind of come up with you could almost see like a picture that's now coming out of this whole new kind of undefined psychedelic world. So it seems like now you can actually point out who stands for what, who's interested in what. And it's really a very interesting thing to me to be part of such a young, developing industry. So, and that also led us to the idea to go into to create like also a YouTube show around this, so that we would have a podcast and a YouTube show related to the podcast. So this will start by the end of June. And this is something that I also came up with because I was thinking a lot about this, what's also in the title of my talk, of my presentation. How do you actually talk about how do you tell healing stories today, and how do you talk about people healing from depression or mental illness, or people who don't even have a mental illness but feel not well mentally, which is, I find, something that's very common these days. There seems to be like a gray zone that's also kind of becoming more and more visible, not only like classic depression, classic psychiatry related diseases, but in the last years, and I mean, I'm sure everybody who's watching and who will be in a conference has that topic since Corona. Even before Corona was a very big number of people suffering from depression, on top of these gray area kind of, or gray zone feelings, I would say, how people actually go through life. And I realized that there has to be also a new way of telling these stories and talking about these stories, or even trying to find almost like a new vocabulary for these stories, or for the, let's say, even I'm not going to say diseases for now, but for these specific kind of gray area feeling. I mean, like I said, we were just working on on a couple of new expressions, and then I realized that it's very important also to actually really see the person that you're going to talk to. And because other things happen when that person is visible, when you are visible talking to that person. And I just can announce that we have in June, we have Christian Angermeyer also as a YouTube guest, and Rick Doblin, who actually, as everybody of you know, is the founder of Maps. And because we saw each other, we had like an incredible kind of, how can I say this, like yeah, we had such a powerful conversation that we really talked about things, and I think in the way that we wouldn't have talked about otherwise. So we're going to work on kind of an, you could say, like a new I'm not going to say entertainment concept for this, but I think what I really would like to achieve with the New Health Club, at least in the beginning, with the, let's say, the content production, you could say, is that we really come up with a language, a media language, like a media aesthetics of storytelling, where most people can actually listen to stories that have to do with psychedelics. And I mean, this is probably, of course, I come from the industry that's telling stories in a different way than, let's say, other people who come from a scientific background. So this is something that we really want to do, that how can we tell stories about psychedelics that everybody basically understands, and how can we talk to scientists and somebody like Rick Doblin, who's a very impressive person, who is doing this for 30, almost over 30 years. How can we do this and just transfer what they actually come up with and what they created for this whole space, that everybody can actually access it, everybody can get their information, and everybody can actually find different healing tools. And I mean, even though we just really started a half a year ago, I keep getting emails, more and more emails every day from people all over the world. And I'm sure that goes for a lot of people who are listening or going to be on that conference or on a conference already. That the questions are pretty much always the same, like, where can I go? Where can I do this? I'm on my 28th antidepressant. I don't know what to do. So obviously, like, the need for these things, it's really probably way bigger than we ever thought. I mean, I ever thought, and maybe even people who just are scientists and are actually doing these fantastic researches since a couple of years. And also, what I find very interesting, and what I'm very, very grateful for, is that Dr. Branas has become a sponsor for 15 episodes of the podcast, and also because they're very interested in bringing the topic in Germany more into a public space. And everybody who's in the psychedelic world in America knows, obviously, of course, that David Bronner is on the board of MAPS, and he's very engaged in decriminalization organizations, and he's very much like a spokesperson for the topic. And I thought it's very interesting how in very different countries, people are actually connecting, and like me and the Bronner company, which is like a very unlikely, let's say, collaboration in the beginning, because I never had anything to do with them before. I just actually asked them, can we talk about a sponsorship? So, and I think it's a really nice experience to me. And also that happens pretty much all the time right now, that you can actually address or approach people and say, well, I think it's great what you're doing, and we are doing this. How can we collaborate? And I think it's a very good moment also to do this. And every time I did it in the last 6 months, something very interesting came out of this. So, and of course, this is only going to be like, let's say, the content part, or the communication part of the New Health Club. And of course, we are working on other business models, because as you all know, this is not like a business model per se to produce podcasts and shows. And there will be more to be talk about like by the end of the year. But what I'm very interested in is, and I think that's going to be a very interesting topic, because pretty much that's something that fascinated me with psychedelics when I got in it by myself, is how to actually customize experiences for people who want to undergo a treatment. And I'm not talking about now, I don't talk about people who might have or might suffer from treatment resistant depression, but more people who are actually blocked by, I don't know, like personal circumstances, or they want to leave their jobs and they don't know how to proceed. They don't really have an idea what could be next in their life, although they feel they should make a move, but they don't really know how. So let's say we will come up with a couple of programs that take care of people who want to answer themselves like bigger life questions. And again, like I can only recommend there for people who obviously all know this, but just if you don't know it, like synthesis is a very interesting and in my perspective, a very well working legal retreat in Amsterdam, where you can actually undergo a psychedelic experience. And they already had, I think in May this year, or I don't know if it took place because of COVID, but they had a seminar or like a retreat only for female leaders, where they could actually find out their strength or could overcome their kind of obstacles. And this was already an example for me where I thought, wow, this is like probably even more interesting and more efficient, or more stronger, even a more stronger experience, if you actually are able to go into a customized trip, I would say, almost, where you come in with a very specific question in a way that you say, for example, this was what I already heard from people who are CEOs and want to work with their team. So for example, let's say after COVID, you come back to your work surroundings as a boss or as a CEO, and you realize your team is kind of off balance, because some people might still suffer from this whole experience, others might not suffer so much, but still your team is imbalanced. And I think it would be very interesting in the future, or maybe in the near future, to, for example, go on a trip like this with a whole team, and to come back as maybe a unity you have been before. And so there's a quick question here from Greg. Firstly, I'm happy about the interest, but feel. Okay, so yeah, okay, I'm just gonna pick that up in a second. And or another, for example, another idea for this customized experience could be that a friend of mine, she is writing a TV show, and I told her about my personal psilocybin experience, and she said to me, well, I want to do this before I write the next show. So of course, for some people, this might not come as a surprise, but I think it could be even a tool to have way more relevant, creative, I don't know, ideas, experiences before you create a new cultural product. But of course, like this is something, let's say, some people would say, well, this is kind of a, what is this expression, bettering the well direction one could go with psychedelics. And but at the same time, and this is my experience in the last 6 months, I also feel that people who actually want to undertake that kind of journey, even coming from not a severely depressed position, all of them basically still have things that they would actually like to address in a different way than they used to address before with a psychiatrist or with their therapist. So, and Craig was just sending me this question here. So we actually, I want to tell these stories. Okay, so Craig is asking me. So there was this movie on Netflix called Have a Good Trip. And we had Donnie Carey on the podcast, the director. And I mean, I was obviously very excited to see that movie because of obviously everybody, every psychedelic movie, every psychedelic TV show you're going to watch these days if you're in that business. So, and of course, I thought also a little bit like, so how did he kind of came up? So he just talked to Sting, he talked to Anthony Bourdain, he talked to Carrie Fisher, and I mean, two people who are no longer with us. So, and I was a little bit also like a little bit irritated, like, so is this the right thing just to talk to people about their acid trip? But Donnie told me that he started to do this movie 11 years ago. And I think also if he would start like 2 years ago, there would be probably Michael Pollan, people like that would be in it. But what's interesting is that one thing that was interesting is that people who we say are celebrities, if they talk about psychedelics, of course, a lot of people will say, and I'm talking especially about Sting right now, who was very open about everything and who was very, talking about his personal experience, and he talked about it in a very relevant way, in a very sympathetic way. So, and I mean, Donnie told me that his father-in-law was like, "Oh, wow, Sting has done this. Well, he's a cool guy. I don't, I know his record, so it seems like not like the worst thing in the world to do." But of course, the other thing is that it's if something like this is related to, let's say, an entertainment or Hollywood world, then it's always like, well, these crazy people doing movies, living in Hollywood, well, of course they can do whatever they want. So, and I think it's going to be in the next couple of years, and this is what, like I said earlier, that we try to work on. I think it's a very interesting experiment to come up really with a new language about talking about psychedelics and talking about trauma. And of course, like Marek talked about it in the beginning, at the moment, there's so many different versions of trauma that we might not have acknowledged in a very long time. And I just want to tell you a story that where I really thought, wow, I was really blind on that spot, actually. I had this blind spot, and we were supposed to have a great therapist on the show, yes, was it last week? And she's a Black woman from New York, and she has a very interesting therapy platform. And I wanted to talk to her about the Black Lives Matter movement, about all the things that are happening. And 2 days before we were supposed to do the podcast, she wrote me an email saying, "Look, I mean, I'm really tired of this. I can't talk about it anymore. I can't sleep at night and so on. I don't want to do it." And so, I mean, for the first time, and I have to admit that for the first time, I realized how much trauma even she, although she has all these tools of being aware of a situation, of a therapy background and everything, although she could, I mean, if somebody like her has really a hard time with this, how about other people? So, and researching about this more and more, I found this really amazing therapist, scientist called Monica Williams, who is with MAPS. And she actually started the first, or she will start the first study for MAPS to heal, to actually to treat racial trauma with the support of MDMA. So, and I think out of all these things that are happening right now, there will come out so many, I mean, yeah, again, like a diverse idea of trauma. And I think of ways of people being traumatized where we never thought that they would actually had that experience. So, and I mean, and that sounds kind of almost embarrassing to admit that, but I think it's a very interesting moment where one can really see what is actually happening. So I'm just seeing, yeah, I have 3 minutes remaining to speak. So if there are any questions that you have about storytelling or what's interesting for you that you might have in that context. Yeah, but I mean, again, I just wanted to say, I'm very happy to be here as a speaker, and I'm also very interested in how other people communicate their, let's say, patient stories. For example, how the big companies or like startups who really produce medicine, like a Thai or also Field Trip, how they actually come up with their way of storytelling. And yeah, to me, this is a very fascinating topic. And I feel that it has really just started. And so, yeah, I'm very excited for our upcoming guests for the show. And I think I should be over now.
I'm going to hop on. I just love to ask you a couple questions. We have around 5 minutes for a Q&A. One of the things that I wanted to ask about is this topic of aggression. And because I think it's something that's really relevant today is, can we actually solve societal problems through things like violent protests, through things that do involve more aggression? Is aggression ever the answer? And if it ever is, then how do we interweave that narrative into storytelling? And just to add on to that a little bit, there are individuals within the psychedelics ecosystem, in the liberal left, in the radical right, that all kind of see that used appropriately, aggression can be useful. And there's also institutions that see that in regards to using psychedelics for combat, and being able to reduce trauma there, but also make individuals more skilled fighters. There's a long history of individuals using psychedelics for martial arts and different forms of combative styles. So would really love to hear, where does aggression, violence, or I guess self-defense in some ways play a role in the narrative that's being told?
But what do you mean exactly about aggression? Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Definitely. So I think like so much of the conversations within the psychedelic space are focused on, being peaceful, being calm, stepping away, instead of being more confrontational, more direct, more, kind of infringing on people's comfort in a certain way, whether that's through physical action or through verbal engagement.
Yeah, well, I think it reminds me, what you say reminds me a lot, a little bit about what people mostly say about yoga. It's like, why are you so agitated? You just did an hour of yoga. You should be like super chill and everything. And it's interesting that I'm just compare it to that because, for example, certain types of yoga, like for example, Kundalini yoga, amplifies way more your real mood than just like, oh, now I'm super chill, I did yoga. And I mean, of course, I think with psychedelics, this is maybe a similar thing. And I mean, I assume like most people who are on this conference, on this call, everybody had like an experience at least once with psychedelics. And I feel there are very violent pictures always, or like images you see like in a trip. I mean, pretty much, I don't think everybody had just like one kind of sunflowers that talking to each other. Hey, you're so nice. So, I mean, for example, I had this 5-hour walk with a rabbi through a concentration camp pretty much twice in a experience that I had, like once LSD, once psilocybin, which was, if I think about it now, it's extremely aggressive. Like it's an aggressive background. It was an aggressive experience, but of course you don't feel attacked, but it's kind of a very brutal surrounding, I would say. And I feel like what comes out of this is, if you come out of the trip or if you get into your talks with your integral therapist, I think it's often what comes out of the, let's call it aggression, is a real determination to go a certain way. And for example, and I'm just saying it because I think that was an example I realized by myself, is when I came out of this trip, talking about with this rabbi about like the repercussions of Holocaust, several topics related to this, I felt like I was so clear also as a German person, for example, suddenly about this topic that I have not seen or not experienced without that kind of harsh experience in the trip. And so I think this, and that's another thing I learned actually in what I find an interesting parallel in Kundalini yoga is to turn aggression into determination, like to go a certain way without, oh, should I do this? Should I talk to these people? Oh, maybe not. Should I ask that person about? So I think the aggression, I feel maybe the aggression you realize you have in a trip could become really something that's turning into, after you also maybe worked on this with an integrational therapist, can become a determination. So
definitely.
That would be something I would say about this.
Yeah, definitely. No, thank you for that. We have a couple minutes left. I do want to ask one more question just out of curiosity.
Sure.
So another narrative that I think is not typically amplified and is more difficult to kind of interweave, especially into psychedelic culture, is the narrative of children. So, you have a really strong perception of the world, possibly a greater empathy for the problems that are going on. We have individuals like Malala and Greta Thunberg who, really advocate for some of these causes that much of the psychedelics movement is also advocating for. So how do we, especially going forward in the psychedelic space, open up the space to be able to actually amplify children's narratives as well, even when children might not necessarily be the people interacting with these compounds?
You mean like, so children, you mean like, for example, somebody like Greta Thunberg, that's what you mean, like
Sure, Greta Thunberg, Malala, but also there's different models for I guess, community-based learning and just kind of interweaving the issues that children care about more. I guess this is something I've seen more in the decentralized governance space, where there's a really large dialogue around how do we actually grant children more say in policy decision-making, for instance. That's a big question in that space. And so I'm wondering if there are parallels with the psychedelics ecosystem, and how does that kind of translate, I guess?
I mean, what I found really interesting, a friend of mine, she went to Peru to do ayahuasca, and she actually told me that in the village where she did it, the woman who was leading her ceremony told her that actually already children are doing this in a very, very small dose, like in the village that they grew up. And first of all, I was like, oh my God, wow, sounds super crazy. But then if you really think it through, and if they're really in that kind of context of their community, then it kind of does make sense that they might be able to, I don't know, to develop completely differently. But of course, it's kind of hard to copy paste this into the cosmology that basically we live in. But what I heard a couple of times is that people who've done psychedelics, let's say if there were male people, most of them, they would actually say that afterwards they could actually connect to their children in a very different way. I mean, let alone to their wives and girlfriends, that too. But if they were married and had kids, it was often that they were able to connect, to open up to them or to connect with them. And that's something that I think about a lot, is how this really also could really change or kind of affect like the so-called classic conflicts in a marriage or in a company, like, in a way saying that, okay, the classic is always like the male CEO is not paying attention to the female leadership qualities. And I mean, like in the rational thinking about these things, I think there's not much progress. But a couple of CEOs who I know who did this, they said, wow, suddenly I could see that what kind of leadership that woman had in my team. And same thing, like if you put it into a private context or in a family context, it's like, wow, suddenly I can open up to my child who might have things that I could not actually relate to before because my own trauma was in the way. And I mean, I can very much relate to that I have the exact experience. I don't have children. I could never really answer the question really why that was. And after my two experiences, suddenly I can relate to children like there was never any problem with this. And I think that's something I think about a lot, how these kind of rational or westernized barriers we kind of write books and articles about and have a whole movies about this, how this is possible that this might even be disappearing. So that's something I think about a lot, actually.
Yeah. Well, and thank you so much for taking the time. Many more conversations ahead, I'm sure. Be well, thank you, and we'll see you for the rest of the conference.
Have a good conference. Bye.